När ett barn blir allvarligt sjukt behöver du hantera en ny vardag. Men det finns stöd att få. Ronald McDonald Hus ger familjer möjligheten att bo tillsammans medan barnet vårdas på sjukhus. Vill du ge fler familjer samma möjlighet? Swisha till 970 22.
Hej! Ivar Arpi här. Innan själva podden börjar vill jag berätta för er om några förändringar på rak höger. Först lite skryt. Totalt är ni nu över 23 000 som prenumererar på rak höger, vilket är otroligt roligt. Det gör mig personligen glad, men syftet är förstås större än så. Rak höger med Ivar Arpi har under det senaste året vuxit med fler skribenter och poddar, och min avsikt är att ge så bra innehåll till er prenumeranter som möjligt, vilket också har varit skälet till att bjuda in andra skribenter. Men mer innehåll med fler skribenter och andra, det innebär även högre kostnader. Samtidigt vill jag ogärna höja priset på prenumerationen. Så därför frågade jag er betalande prenumeranter hur ni såg på att poddarna skulle börja innehålla reklam. Och de allra flesta av er tyckte att det var okej, så länge betalande prenumeranter slapp höra på det. Därför provar jag nu att låta Acast lägga in sin reklam i gratisversionen av poddarna. På det här sättet får gratislyssnarna dra sitt strå till stacken, och reklamintäkter kan gå till arvoden till de som skriver och poddar och på annat sätt hjälper rak höger att bli en så bra publikation som möjligt. För att bli betalande prenumerant och slippa reklam, så gå in på www.enrakhoger.se/podd. Kom ihåg att använda /podd, så får du 30% rabatt dessutom. Men nu till podden. One should not always think the worst of one's political opponents or even enemies. Nobody is all good, nobody is all bad. I've met awful people who I mostly agree with on political issues, and I've met great people who I disagree with on most issues. And I know this might come off as pretentious or holier-than-thou, but I always try, at least try, to have hope for people to surprise me. Otherwise, what the hell am I doing with all this writing and talking? I want to believe that a great text with sufficiently convincing facts will sway even people who started off disagreeing with it all. Maybe this makes me some sort of naive, small L liberal to a certain extent. I don't know. But I have to say that I wasn't surprised with the reactions to the 7th of October massacre in Israel last year. I've followed the postcolonial left for too long to be surprised that they celebrated. And I've witnessed the imported antisemitism many Muslims carry with them here firsthand. I wasn't surprised by the complete lack of show of empathy for the victims of the massacre, or the outpour of empathy for Gaza the day after. Not for the hostages taken there, or the murder victims at the Nova Music Festival, and this was even before Israel had responded. Why? Why this evil right in our midst? That's what today's guest has written a new book about. Brendan O'Neill is the chief political writer at Spiked Online, where he was also the editor from 2007 until 2021. And his latest book is called After the Pogrom, the 7th of October, Israel and the Crisis of Civilization. Brendan is hard to put a label on, but he has in the past called himself a Marxist libertarian, which doesn't really make much sense, but disregarding labels, he always makes sense in my view, and is one of the people I've often turned to when the world seems to be going mad. So I'm very happy to talk to him today. But now on to today's guest. You're listening to Rak Höger with me, Ivar Arpi.
I have a secret. I used to struggle with dull, saggy skin. Then I found Spoiled Child's E27 liquid collagen. This extra strength liquid formula, packed with type 1 and type 3 collagen, vitamin C, and hyaluronic acid, makes it so easy to visibly transform your skin and hair. No more chunky collagen powders, just a smooth, delicious liquid that can be blended with any drink. With over 100,000 five-star reviews, this liquid collagen is going viral for a reason. And with their try before you buy offer, you could try your full-size product at home before buying. Take the quiz at spoiledchild.com/quiz. That's spoiledchild.com/quiz.
Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience. And the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. Minimum purchase may apply.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
Welcome back, Brendan O'Neill, to Rak Höger.
Thank you, Ivar. It's a pleasure to be back on.
And as I just said before we started recording, I was a little bit... You emailed me. We've been emailing sporadically for years, but you emailed me and like, I've written a new book. Maybe you'd like to read it. And of course, I'd like to read it. And then I saw the title of the book. It's After the Pogrom. And I was immediately, I knew that I was going to be annoyed because, not because of the content of the book, because of the content of the book, because I knew that, because it's you and I've followed you for many years, I knew that I would probably agree with large parts of it, as I usually do. But I had a similar idea after the 7th of October, which we will be talking about, and I was like, I should write a book about this. And I started, but then my wife got pregnant, and I have a list of excuses for why I'm not finished with the book yet. My publisher has heard all of them. So, but in reality, I'm really thankful that you're writing this book, and it's a great read. And I would just like jump into the title, and because you argue that the Western response to the 7th of October attacks by Hamas against Israeli civilians primarily, the response in the West displayed a form of pogrom apologism, as you phrase it. Could you expand on what that means and why there wasn't a clear-cut condemnation?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'm very pleased to have annoyed you by getting this book out, because I know that you and me will have similar thoughts on this subject. So I'm glad I snuck in there before you had a chance to do it. You were too busy living life. In the book, I remind people what happened after the 7th of October, because I think some people have forgotten, or it's slowly being erased from the public consciousness, just what happened in the West after the 7th of October attacks, which, by the way, to remind your listeners, who I'm sure don't need any reminding, was the worst mass murder of Jewish people since the Holocaust. So this was a very, very significant event. It was, in my view, one of the worst rippings of civilization that we've ever witnessed. I think it was that serious in terms of its intent and its execution and the impact that it had. And what happened in the West is that people celebrated it. You know, I remind people in my book that there were gatherings on the streets in London, in Sydney, in New York, in Paris, in Berlin, possibly in Stockholm as well. There were gatherings on the streets the day after the pogrom, within 24 hours, certainly within 48 hours, when Israel had not properly responded to the attack. And certainly long before Israel launched its ground invasion of Gaza, which didn't come until the 27th of October. People were on the streets on the 8th of October, and I remember thinking to myself, why are they on the streets? And then you realise they're on the streets to celebrate the murder of Jewish people. And there was a gathering outside the Israeli embassy in London, for example. There were large numbers of people outside the Israeli embassy on the 8th of October, and they were dancing and playing music and waving the Palestinian flag and telling any media person who interviewed them that they supported Hamas's attack 100%. This was a celebration of a pogrom. And to me, it was as sick and perverse as if people had poured onto the streets of London to celebrate Kristallnacht. And we would remember if people in London had celebrated Kristallnacht. So I think we should remember that people in London celebrated the 7th of October, as people did around the world. So when I saw those events very early on, I remember thinking to myself, I knew the response in the West to Hamas's attack was going to be bad. I knew there would be excuse-making and apologetics and all the usual crap that we see. But I think it's going to be worse than I thought. I think it's going to actually raise to the surface all the moral rot in our societies. I thought that very, very early on. And that is exactly what happened. I think the crisis of our own civilization has been refracted through our response to 7th of October. And that's why I thought I've got to sit down and write this book.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic read, but I would like my primal response to it is like you get adrenaline rushes. You read like a chapter and then you have to, okay, I'm gonna go for a walk, and you come back and you read another, and like, oh, I'm gonna have to do like 50 push-ups, like, because you get so angry, and you also revisit the memories. And as you say, I mean, I also thought that it would be bad, and like there are. In Sweden, I just checked on the post-colonial left and academics and activists on their Facebook pages. And many of them like changed their profile pictures to Palestinian flags on the very day of the pogrom, on the very day of the attacks. And of course, you could say that, oh no, it's a symbol of resistance, but it matters when you do it and how you do it. And like even the day after, they were calling for like against Israel, before Israel had even responded. And I mean, if they would have condemned the attacks very harshly and then condemned Israel, at least they would have had some sort of, leverage, so to speak, moral leverage, like we condemn this and now we condemn that. But there was no condemnation. It was only, we had like a, you're right, you mentioned that the West failed a moral test, as you put it, in its reaction, and we've been talking about it now. And I'm on October the 22nd of October, I wrote an article on my Substack with about the reactions from Swedish activists, celebrities, and like the left-wing intelligentsia, and they failed to condemn the massacre, the pogrom. Like there was complete silence. But when there was like some sort of retaliation from Israel, then it was like an outpour of sympathy and calls for a ceasefire. And you highlight a similar selective empathy and moral blindness, so to speak, in your book. So
Yeah.
why do you think this double standard or hypocrisy? Why do you think this is?
Yeah, I mean, it is an extraordinary double standard. It really is incalculable, the extent of the double standard that is applied to Israel as opposed to every other nation in the world, essentially. And, you know, when left-wing activists, when the activist class and the intelligentsia, when they did exactly as you described, so they said nothing about the pogrom, except maybe they celebrated it, but they didn't really condemn it. But then they instantly condemned Israel as soon as it took action. What they are saying when they do that, they are saying that the Jewish state should just take it on the chin. Jews should let themselves be killed. That is fundamentally what they're saying, because if you say nothing when Jews are killed in their hundreds, as they were on 7th of October, but then you have a hissy fit and take to the streets when those Jews fight back, that's what you're saying. You are saying, lay down your arms and let it happen. And, you know, we now have a situation where the two great obsessions of the activist class in much of Western society is firstly to encourage our states to stop arming Israel, so to take away Israel's arms, and while at the same time making excuses for Israel's enemies in Hamas and Hezbollah and saying that they have a justification for attacking Israel. So that adds up to they are publicly calling for the disarming of Jewish people and the continued existence of Jewish people's enemies. So they really are fellow travellers of a fascist militia. That's what they have become, and it really is not hyperbole to say that. That is the substance of the positions that they have taken since 7th of October. Take away the arms from the Jewish nation, leave them in the hands of the people who want to destroy the Jewish nation. That's what they're saying. And I think, you know, that double standard really springs from, you know, 100 years ago, clever Marxists, because there were some clever Marxists 100 years ago, they used to talk about something called the socialism of fools. And the socialism of fools was a reference to people on the left who blamed capitalism on Jewish people, who said that we hate capitalism and it's all a conspiracy by Jewish bankers and Jewish businessmen and so on. So that was referred to as the socialism of fools. What we have now, I think, is the anti-imperialism of fools, which is a supposed anti-imperialism that obsesses over one country in particular, Israel, which only gets excited when Israel takes action, which only goes onto the streets when Israel is involved in a war. You know, Syria, China, Iran, Turkey, all these countries can carry out all sorts of awful atrocities, and these people will just stay in bed or go to the gastropub or do their normal stuff. But the minute Israel so much as puts a missile into a missile launcher, they are ironing their Palestine flags, getting their keffiyehs out from the closet, putting them on and going onto the streets to say genocide, genocide. So it's the anti-imperialism of fools, because just as the socialism of fools saw the Jewish people as the source of the world's ills, you have these new leftists who see the Jewish nation as the source of the world's ills. So they have transported that old, bigoted, pseudo-radical politics from the Jewish people onto the Jewish state. And I think that explains a lot of the double standard. I think there is this obsessive focus on Israel, this judgment of it by a different standard, and this belief that Israel is really not only a menace to the Middle East, but a menace to the entire world. You often hear radical leftists say, none of us are free until Palestine is free. And what that really translates into is saying that we are all slaves of Israel. We are all imprisoned by the threat that Israel poses to global affairs. So they've allowed their hatred for Israel to become all-consuming, which means that they think everything Israel does is bad and everything done to Israel is potentially justifiable. And they've really talked themselves into that quite dangerous corner.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes in detail.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
And they, you often hear this is common in on the left in other issues as well, but you hear the framing of its resistance. So it's Hamas, that's resistance. Even Hezbollah and Iran's attacks. I mean, you can frame basically everything you do towards Israel as some form of resistance. And just today, I read a columnist who was he didn't have any answers himself, but he called for all the political and opinion writers to present an answer as to how should Palestinians resist if this is not okay, and could begin by not butchering civilians. That's a good start. But I would also, something that you touch on in the book, you write about it is you write one of the most striking things in the aftermath of the 7th of October was the silence of the fascism spotters. And I mean, I think Britain and Sweden is very similar in this regard. I've been called, I have the privilege of being both being drawn as a anti-Semitic caricature, because I have a big nose to begin with, and then they've like made it even bigger and calling me a Jew lover. And I'm not offended by being called that, but like it's very strange because I'm not Jewish, and simultaneously being called a Nazi, and I have a longer history of being called a Nazi for different reasons, like this is Nazis, this is fascism, this is the 30s all over again. So we've been hearing that, like the reading about hearing the marching boots and like this is the beginning of the 30s again for ages. But somehow, after the 7th of October, where were they? Like, what happened to the fascism spotters? Yeah.
I mean, well, firstly, you have a very good nose. I never trust a man with a small nose, I find. I think that's a good approach to life. It always.
I wouldn't need, like in Lord of the Rings, they had to put on like prosthetics on the actors to enhance. I wouldn't need that. Like I could be in Lord of the Rings like a sullen dwarf in the corner with my own nose.
You have a great Scandinavian side profile. I think that's it's a good thing to have. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we live in a world in which everything is fascism. Everything that the chattering classes don't like, everything that the so-called liberal intelligentsia doesn't like, is referred to as fascistic or far right, or has echoes of the 1930s. I mean, you can really trace this over the past 10 years, almost 10 years, since the vote for Brexit in 2016 and the victory of Donald Trump in the same year. That's when it really took off. Brexit was referred to as a fascistic vote by the dim-witted hordes of Britain, us stupid gammon and idiots and lowlifes and riffraff, who were hoodwinked by the fascist press, apparently. And the same stuff was said about Donald Trump, even worse about Donald Trump, Hitler 2.0, the new Hitler, he was going to turn the American Republic into a fascist outpost. All of this stuff was said everywhere, in the mainstream media, on the streets, in academic circles. I mean, it was just relentless. Mm-hmm. And then what you had after the 7th of October was a complete moratorium on all of that, and a clampdown on all of it. So The Guardian, for example, The Guardian, just a couple of weeks after 7th of October, The Guardian published a piece really quite sternly denouncing Israel for comparing Hamas to fascists. The Guardian said, "How dare you do this? This is outrageous. You're presenting yourselves as the victims of fascism. That's unacceptable." This is the same Guardian newspaper that has spent the past 10 years wetting its pants over the new Hitler, Donald Trump, and the fascist idiots who voted for Brexit, and the rise of populist parties in Europe as the return of Nazism. Populist parties in Italy, France, Sweden, all of them were denounced by The Guardian as the new fascists. And yet, when an openly anti-Semitic army invaded the Jewish state and butchered more than 1,000 Jewish men, women and children, and bundled Jewish women onto trucks to drive them back to enemy territory, and kidnapped grandmothers and kidnapped Jewish grandmothers and Jewish children, then The Guardian said, let's not talk about fascism. Let's not mention the word Nazism. Let's not make any comparisons to the 1930s. So it seems to a certain group of people, everything is fascism except fascism. Everything reminds them of the 1930s except this one event that was actually reminiscent of the 1930s. So the hypocrisy was just extraordinary. And I think what it pointed to, and I make this point in my book, there's a chapter that you quoted from called Holocaust Envy. And I make the argument that what's going on here is something really profoundly sinister, which is, I think, over the past few years, we've witnessed a kind of a removal of the Holocaust from the Jews. So the Holocaust is no longer understood as a conscious effort by the Nazis to exterminate the Jewish people. Instead, it's understood as just a free-floating example of human cruelty, in which everyone was killed, not just Jews, but also trans people. Trans activists are always saying we were victims of the Holocaust too, which, by the way, is bullshit. It's completely untrue. And, the 6 or 7 trans victims that they can point to are homosexual men or Jewish men, right? They were not killed because they were transgender. They were killed because they were Jews or because they were homosexual. So it's just lies. But there's this kind of jealous desire to be part of the Holocaust experience because it boosts your victim points in the modern era. It allows you to pose as having been a part of the worst crime in modern history. So there's been this effort to take the Holocaust away from the Jews and to turn it into just a kind of a shallow symbol of cruelty in general, man's inhumanity to man rather than anti-Semitic extermination. And so that's why I think over the past 10 years, the Holocaust could be weaponized by the elites to denounce populism, to denounce Brexit, to denounce the Sweden Democrats, to denounce Trump. Anything they wanted to denounce, they would use the Holocaust as a moral shield through which to do that. And now they're telling the nation that was founded by descendants of the Holocaust that they are not allowed to do the same thing. So they have claimed moral ownership of the Holocaust. They have claimed it as a weapon that they can use in political terms and as something that really is not very much related to the Jewish people or the Jewish state. I think for me, that was one of the most sinister things that happened in the West after 7th of October.
I mean, this Holocaust envy is great. It's a great word, and I think it's a great concept because I think it really captures what it's about. And I interviewed Jonathan Friedland, who wrote a book about the first the escape artist. It's called, about like one of the 3 Jewish men to escape Auschwitz, and we also spoke about the Holocaust, and like one of the there are different conclusions drawn from the experience or the memory, if you could call it that, and one of them is this is what happens when a majority is intolerant to minorities, and So we need to be very conscious of minority politics and recognition, and so that's one strand, and I think that is what has led to, in the long run, to identity politics and to many of those kinds of. It has morphed into a very sinister ideology. But the other conclusion was drawn by the Israeli state, and so when we say never again, we, like in the West, I'm not present company excluded, but in the West we sort of mean like, this can never happen again, like in a general sense. It can mean trans people, it can mean, sometimes it can perhaps mean animals. It's like, it's sort of a call to being more humane in a very general sense. And like, if you're white or if you're male and you're heterosexual, you should like check your privilege and stuff like that. That's the never again in the West. But in Israel, we will take measures to see that we are not murdered again. And so when Israel responds, it's like, you're not acting as the proper victims. We should have a ceasefire, and then you should cry and you should mourn, but you should not win. We cannot forgive. Sometimes I think I wrote this and I was called anti-Semitic because of this. And I said that it seems like parts of the West cannot forgive Israel for not rolling over and losing every time. Like, we can't forgive them for standing up for themselves because it doesn't like rhyme with the other lesson that we think they should be learned. Yeah. I'm not sure how I became anti-Semitic by saying that, but I guess I must have done something. But what do you say about those two lessons? Like, do you agree, or how do you view it?
Yeah, I think, I was in Israel. I've been in Israel a few times over the years, and the last time I was there, a gentleman said to me that the lesson that Western societies took from the Second World War is that nationalism is terrible. The lesson that Jews took from the Second World War is that we really need a nation because otherwise we're going to be exterminated. So, and that's so true. If you look at, the post-war environment in Europe has been very much geared towards the dilution of sovereignty, the dilution of nationhood, and it ends up, of course, in the vast oligarchy of the European Union, which is entirely devoted to weakening the sovereignty of nations under the auspices, the phony auspices of being post-fascist, as this is our revenge on Nazi Germany. We're not going to have any nations at all. We're not going to have any nationalist leaders. We're just going to have pooled sovereignty across Europe where every nation pulls together and has meetings behind closed doors and does everything above the heads of the pesky people, and open your borders, let people flow through, let capital flow through. It's all fine. That has been the post-war atmosphere in Europe. And in my view, it's been pretty disastrous. It has really hurt democracy. It has weakened the power of people within nations to make decisions about their nations. It has led in recent years to movements of migrants that have had pretty destructive consequences for the countries they've moved into. That's the case for Sweden. It's the case for other countries as well. So I think that kind of post-borders, post-nationhood worldview, which was the ridiculously wrong lesson that the elites took from the Second World War, that really has been dangerous. And then, of course, the Jewish people took the polar opposite lesson, which is that if we don't build a nation, we're fucked, if you'll excuse my language. That's the lesson they took, and they were right to take that lesson. And they were right to build a modern version of the state of Israel, which is the state that their people have lived in or dreamt of returning to for many thousands of years. So yes, that's a real striking point of divergence between Europe and the Jewish people since the Second World War, and then that translates into the point you're making as well about the whole idea of never again. And you're right that in Europe, never again has been relativized to such a degree that it just doesn't have its original meaning at all. It now means never again just means, don't be a bad person. Don't use bigoted language. Don't criticize mass immigration. Even doing that could have someone wagging their finger at you and say, never again. Don't treat Muslims like we once treated Jews. I mean, people openly say that.
I love is the wrong word, but you bring up an example that's been there are many similar instances that I know of in Sweden, but you bring up when the Muslim Council of Britain boycotted the Holocaust Memorial Day on the basis that it was too narrowly focused on Jewish suffering.
Yeah.
And that's like stretching the lesson very far.
Absolutely.
So
can you basically saying the Holocaust Memorial Day is too narrowly focused on the Holocaust? Well, if you want to make your own day about something, then go and do it. But they had to hijack this day, of course, because the aim was to dismantle the idea of Jewish suffering in order to boost the idea of other groups suffering, because that's how you gain social capital and how you win funding and sympathy and so on from the elites. You present yourself as a victim group, and therefore it just won't do for the Jews to have a singular claim on the worst case of victimization in the 20th century. It's unacceptable to identity groups for that so they actively, openly chip away at the Jewish claim to suffering during the Holocaust and claim some of it for themselves. It's grotesque. But, on the never again thing, you're absolutely right that's been relativized just to mean, don't be nasty. Be nice. It's part of the be kind strategy. It has no relation to historical events, and particularly the historical event of the murder of the Jews. But since 7th of October, it's got even worse than that, because what's happened now is that the slogan never again has been weaponized against Jews themselves. So not only has it been robbed of its original meaning, which is never again will we allow societies to go so mad that they will try to exterminate the Jewish people. Not only has it lost that meaning, but it's now used as a tool against the Jews themselves. So you will go on demonstrations in London, New York, I'm sure Stockholm as well, and you will continually see people comparing the Jewish state to the Nazis. You will see the Star of David mangled together with the Nazi swastika. You will see Benjamin Netanyahu with a Hitler moustache on all their placards. And you will see people saying never again means never again. So they're now lecturing the survivors of the Holocaust, the descendants of the Holocaust survivors, about the importance of not carrying out a genocide. So we have this, and you also see it in the International Criminal Court and its continual efforts to bring a charge against Israel for genocide. What's happened is that all of the institutions and slogans that came out of the Second World War, which were designed initially to protect Jewish people from going through anything like that again, all of those institutions and slogans are now deployed against the Jewish people, who are accused of being the new Nazis, who are accused of defying the slogan never again and carrying out a new Holocaust, who are accused of wanting to exterminate the Palestinians, which is clearly not true. So
they're doing a very bad. They're the worst genociders in history, I would say.
It's awful. It's really an incompetent genocide. The number of people in Gaza has skyrocketed over the past few decades. Which is fine. If people want to have children, that's absolutely their business. I don't have a problem with that at all. But where's this genocide? The Jews are obviously, they might be good at other things, but they're not good at this. But one of the striking things since 7th of October is that there's this real clash within sections of the left, because they can't decide whether to depict Gaza pre-7th of October as this wonderful, glorious land where they had hotels and restaurants and people cycled to school, and then Israel came and destroyed it all, or to depict it as an open-air concentration camp, which has always been hell on earth because of those pesky Jews across the border. I've loved watching them really struggle with their internal conscience about which vision of Gaza to put forward. Was it a wonderland before the IDF came, or was it always a hellhole? And that clash, from one day to the next, you can see them making the polar opposite claims about the nature of Gaza. I think that clash really sums up how confused they are about what this war involves and what's at stake.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes in detail.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Yeah, and now you had the... We're talking now, and it's gearing up to be. Iran just attacked Israel with ballistic missiles and rockets, and it was the largest such attack in a single day ever, I think, with that kind of advanced weaponry. At least I'm not an expert, but I heard an expert say that on the radio, so it must be true. But we don't know the extent of the damages, and it seems like Israel, together with the United States, defended itself. But when they did, the reason for this
Under miljontals år har djur utvecklat sofistikerade parningsritualer. Fåglar dansar, vargar ylar och Oscar går in på Amazon för att förbereda sin date night lasagne till King. På Amazon hittar han levande ljus, lyxiga vinglas till fyndpris och en extra tandborste utifall att. Date night får det att hända. Hitta det på amazon.se.
Upptäck Ford e-Custom, elversionen av Europas mest sålda transportbil. Den har upp till 370 kilometers räckvidd, snabbladdning och finns nu med 4-hjulsdrift. Just nu till Ford Pro Edition-pris från 479 000 ex-moms. Läs mer på Ford.se eller besök din Ford återförsäljare. Ready, set, Ford.
Tänk om din plånbok kunde prata. Vad skulle den då säga om din relation till ekonomi?
Alla relationer har ju sina ups and downs. Men att han har lån lite här och där, det tror jag skulle vara en ick för rätt många plånböcker och inte bara för mig.
Ett första steg mot en bättre relation till sin plånbok kan vara att samla sina lån.
Samla dina lån till ett på lendo.se.
Escalation from in the war, if you can call it an escalation, it's been pretty escalated for a long time, but was also that the beepers and the walkie-talkies of Hezbollah was targeted, and we presume it was by Israel. I would like just interject into that assumption that Saudi Arabia, Jordania, United States, there are many actors in the world that shares interests, but I mean, if we want to portray Israel as being very competent, I don't have an argument with that. But we don't actually know who did it. But when that happened, when those beepers went up, exploded, and many people in Hezbollah were wounded, some were killed. In Sweden, at least, there was like an outrage that there were civilians being wounded, and on the one hand, as a human being, I feel there was like an example of a Lebanese girl who seemed to have gone to pick up her father's beeper and give it to him, and she was killed, I think. And I mean, I have a daughter in similar age. Of course, on a human level, I feel like it's awful. It's tragic. But it's at the same time, it's strange that if there's like one civilian casualty, that means Israel is conducting a genocide, and it means it's gone too far. And that was the framing in media in Sweden, and like how many journalists like framed, is it really acceptable? Is this? And then one of the legal experts, Uwe Bring, which was involved in 2003 from the UN, one of the weapon inspectors that said that we need more time, and the United States said that no, we're bringing freedom now, so to speak. And he said that of course Israel can attack Hezbollah because the Lebanese state doesn't protect its own sovereignty. It doesn't have control over its own territory. So if there's a military group operating out of that territory and that state doesn't control it, then the state being attacked has the right to respond. But what I'm trying to get at here is like you have the standard of Israel should never kill civilians, and they should also keep track on exactly how many civilians are collaterally damaged, killed, wounded. And on the other side, you have Iran, as I said, they sent over, well, I think it was the tally I've seen is 180 ballistic missiles and rockets, and each one of those can kill huge numbers of people, and they target the civilian areas. And you have Hamas targeting civilian areas, Hezbollah targeting civilian areas. And in the debate, there's no outrage.
Yeah,
This is like the worst journalist question ever, because I don't even land in a question. But I know exactly what you're saying, and it's the thing that struck me was there was so much more outrage about the young Lebanese girl who died because the pager blew up, and like you, I think that was awful and a colossal human tragedy. Huge outrage about that. People have been going on about it since it happened, completely out of proportion to when a Hezbollah rocket killed 12 children in northern Israel just 2 months ago. A Hezbollah rocket killed 12 Druze children from the Druze ethnic minority in the north of Israel, and there was barely any commentary about that whatsoever. There was certainly no protest, no social media meltdown. So one Lebanese child's life has more moral worth than 12 Israeli children's lives. Is that what these people are saying? I mean, I know that's what they're saying. I know that's what they think. But it's extraordinary to see it laid out so clearly over the space of just 2 or 3 months in their reaction to these different events. I think the pagers and the walkie-talkies attack on Hezbollah. I mean, you're right. Israel has not claimed responsibility for it, but it seems pretty clear that Israel did it. I mean, that would be my non-expert guess. And to my mind, it was one of the most extraordinary acts of war in human history. And I really think one should always be careful not to relish in war, because war is always a regrettable thing, even when it's a necessary thing. So I don't want to relish in it, but I do think we ought to marvel at what an ingenious act of warfare it was. It was like 3,000 mini Trojan horses directly in the pockets of the enemy. Nothing like that has ever occurred in history. In the old days, you had to build an actual massive Trojan horse and hide inside and try and fool your idiot enemies to get through the gates. Now they, over months and months, in fact, years and years, it seems, Israel, we suspect, set up fake businesses and fake pages makers, or, put in certain orders. It did all sorts of things, seemingly intercepted them, planted them with tiny amounts of explosives, and then heated them up on the same day so that these Hezbollah militants would be injured or killed.
It's extraordinary, and it's one of the most targeted attacks on terrorists ever. Of course, it still involves risk, and the death of that girl is proof of that, because anyone can pick up a pager. But these were pagers that were, for the vast majority of cases, were on Hezbollah militants in their pockets. And the vast majority of people wounded or killed were Hezbollah militants. And yet even that caused outrage. So if Israel bombs residential areas in Gaza because Hamas is hiding there, that's a war crime. If Israel puts explosives in the pockets of terrorists, that's also a war crime. Everything Israel does is treated as a crime. And that's because these people see the existence of Israel as a crime. They see the Jewish state as a vast criminal imposition on the Middle East. They think it has no legitimacy whatsoever, and therefore everything it does has no legitimacy. So their contempt for Israel, their defaming of it as a criminal genocidal state, really speaks to their own latent bigotries, and particularly their bigoted belief that, unique among the peoples of the world, the Jews don't have a right to a homeland. And that's really, when you boil it down, that really is what they're saying.
And you also write in the towards the end of your book, we that Western civilization's core principles are being undermined by a failure to uphold universal values in the face of anti-Semitism and extremism, and also that how we treat Israel is sort of has consequences for how we view ourselves and its place in the Western world. And what can we do what should we do to defend these principles? Are there any concrete steps or measures we could take, and vis-a-vis the Western civilization at large, and also Israel specifically?
Yeah, well,
solve it for me.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? What can we do? And my book kind of touches on it, but it doesn't go into great detail. I've never really been a solutions man. I've always been, here are the problems. Now let's talk about them, and then if we talk about them, maybe we can do something about them. But I think, you're right. That's exactly what my book argues. Fundamentally, it argues that the hysterical hatred for Israel is really, anti-Israel sentiment is really an extension of the anti-Westernism that is rife in the West. So, and to me, it makes sense. If you encourage a new generation in particular to turn their backs on the gains of Western civilization, to look upon their own nations as having been born from the sins of slavery or colonialism or empire or racism, if you tell them that borders are meaningless and nationhood is meaningless and your country's history is meaningless, your country is basically a shop or a hotel for capitalists and migrants, and nothing more than that. If you continually communicate these messages to a new generation about, the fakeness of Western civilization, you cannot then be surprised if they are tempted into the arms of the opposite of that, which is barbarism. You cannot be surprised if they look at something like 7th of October and think, oh, look, there's brown people attacking white people as they narrowly see it. That must be a good thing. There's a movement that poses as anti-colonial, Hamas, and it's attacking this colonial settler entity that I've been told about for the past 10 years. That must be a good thing. So the more that we encourage our young in particular to have contempt for their own civilization and their own way of life, the more that we will create a situation where they will fall into the cesspit of barbarous thinking. And I think that's what's been happening in the West. And I think it took on an external form after the 7th of October, where some in the activist class were almost titillated by what Hamas did. They openly said this. I remind people in my book that there were academics in America and Britain and around Europe who said they felt enlivened by this attack. They felt it gave them a sense of purpose and a sense of life, because they're, when they talk about decolonization, all they mean is replacing Geoffrey Chaucer with Alice Walker on the curriculum. That's all they ever do. They have such boring, non-radical lives that they wish they had something more going for them. And so they see this violent attack on a state that they hate, and it gives them a sense of purpose. So it really has pointed to the crisis of civilization. There is no question about that whatsoever. And I think in terms of repairing that crisis of civilization, it is a two-pronged approach. Firstly, it is dismantling all the Israelophobic arguments and making the reasoned, fact-based case for the continued existence and flourishing of the Jewish state, reminding people about the truth of how the Jewish state came about, which was in an anti-colonial war with the British Empire by Jewish rebels. This is fundamentally a post-colonial state, not a colonial state. And reminding them that the Jews have had a homeland there for 3,000 years and have every right to have a homeland there again. And then in terms of the crisis of civilization, well, it really is just all the stuff that people like you and me and others try to do on a daily or weekly basis.
Primarily you and me.
Yeah, just me and you. With podcasts, that podcasts will save the world fundamentally if we do it right. And I think it's just having those arguments and challenging wokeness or whatever the hell we're meant to call it, and making the case for proud sovereign nations that value their history, value their enlightened values, value their civilization, and taking pride in that. That's apparently that makes me a bigot and a racist and a fascist. But
that's why I invited you. I'm very disappointed. I just gotten the other stuff. Like I was waiting for the fascism to begin.
Well, here it is.
Fascist Brendan O'Neill, today's guest, and then this. But like if you watch Britain, there are some. I wanted to ask you also about the freedom of speech and the status of it in Britain now, and your take on it, because you've been a vocal defender of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and basically what we used to call liberal rights and freedoms, and I guess it's fascist rights and freedom now, or something. But there's been like very concerning trends as an outside observer, when you can see like after the protests or the riots earlier this year during summer, when people from there were rumors that a Muslim had committed a murder, but it turns out it was somebody else, and but from those rumors it became riots and protests, and the police acted very quickly in Britain, and some of it might have been they've acted on good information and they did just the right thing, and it's commendable. But there are many instances, as you can see, at least from what I've seen, that they have sort of locked away people for a long time for saying pretty, maybe you don't agree with it, but it's not like threatening or incitement. It's mostly like angry tweets, as I would call it, and they're not like huge influencers, but like regular people. But so what's happening, and are you concerned? And
Yeah, I think I'm very, very concerned. Freedom of speech is in a bad way in Britain at the moment. You're right to point to the post-riot atmosphere, because after those riots, which broke out across the country, from Belfast down to Portsmouth and from Liverpool across to Hull, all across the country there were riots, and there was a lot of very destructive behaviour. There was a lot of very criminal behaviour. I do not support attacking hotels or mosques, or certainly not mosques, or police or anyone else. But I'm one of those old-fashioned, I guess, sociological types who thinks that when diverse communities across an entire nation explode in riotous fury, there's probably something going on under the surface that we need to talk about. And the
fascism.
idea that Yeah, right. That's what they said. It was all puppeteered by Tommy Robinson from his Sun Lounger in Cyprus or wherever he was. I mean, anyone who believes that is an idiot. It's completely false. And there was an internal dynamic to these riots that no one wants to talk about. No one wants to talk about the fact that left behind, formerly working class communities exploded in riotous rage for a week. Something's going on there. No one wants to talk about it. So instead, we've just had an authoritarian clampdown and everyone's been put in jail for 5 years or 10 years, out of sight, out of mind. So it's just this kind of real assault on those communities. And one of those assaults has taken the form of putting people in jail for things they said on social media. So to give you an example of how messed up Britain is right now, at the start of this year, in January, I think, a man with a knife, I believe it was a Muslim man with a knife, went into a kosher shop in Golders Green, which is a part of London with a large Jewish population. He went into a kosher shop with a knife and he jabbed the knife towards people in the shop and said, "What are your views on Israel and Gaza? Tell me your views. I'm sick of you people." He got a
friend of freedom of speech, apparently.
Yeah, right. He's expressing himself. He got a suspended sentence. He did not spend 1 minute in jail, not 1 minute, for wielding a knife at Jewish people. Fast forward to the riots situation and the aftermath of the riots, and a 53-year-old woman who is the sole carer for her disabled husband and who has never troubled the law before has been sentenced to 15 months in jail. She will spend the next 15 months in jail because she wrote something on Facebook during the riots. Now, what she wrote was nasty. She said some people had gone to one of the mosques and helped to repair the damage that was done by the rioters. And she said, why are they rebuilding the mosques? They should burn it down. Now, one could technically argue that that was incitement to violence. I don't really accept that argument. I think I do think incitement to violence is not legitimate speech. I think if someone tries to coax you to commit a violent act, then they are part of that violent act. But I think if you're online and you're letting off steam and you're talking crap and you've got 7 followers or however many she had, and you put up a stupid comment like that and then you delete it, which she did, to my mind, that was a stupid, reckless, irresponsible act, not a crime deserving of 15 months in jail. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a country in which you do not go to jail if you wield a knife in the face of Jews, but you do go to jail if you talk shit on Facebook. And it's a real sign of the crisis of freedom of speech. And after the riots, the Labour government here, Keir Starmer's government, is now talking about harsher clampdowns on misinformation. And misinformation often just means ideas the establishment doesn't like. I mean, that's usually what it means, in fact. And there's even talk amongst the Labour government about bringing in stricter rules against Islamophobia. And you will know from recent controversies in Sweden and elsewhere in Europe, but that every effort to clamp down on Islamophobia is really an effort to clamp down on so-called blasphemy, on anyone who says anything untoward or supposedly unacceptable about the religion of Islam. So, yeah, in Britain, in 2024, we have a government that has utter contempt for the value of freedom of speech and thinks nothing about throwing people in jail for writing words on social media and even for potentially feeling the collars of people who say critical things about Islam. So the next few months and next few years are going to be tough in Britain when it comes to freedom of speech.
I just like... There's a similar trend in Sweden, but it seems like our politicians, and I marvel at what I'm about to say, but it seems like our politicians in Sweden are less inclined to go ahead with some of these policies. But I mean, the trend is similar, and it's been like we had the Quran burnings, and we had a terrorist attack towards Swedes in Brussels, and they were targeted because they were Swedes, and we forgot immediately about it. Like basically the day after it was gone from our minds in Sweden. But so, and we have like a high level of terrorist threat in Sweden, and it's not gone down. And we were threatened by Iran, like they said, you've just started a war towards the whole Muslim world. And my thoughts now is like, do they have any pagers? Do we know if they have any pagers? That's what I feel. But that's not that might be incitement, but I think it's okay if if it's incitement towards the leadership of Iran. I don't think that's criminal. But you have now a proposal to that will change the law in Sweden so that if a demonstration is conducted and that demonstration will cause a reaction that will be a threat to the safety of the nation, then the police will have the authority to deny that demonstration. And that's a proposal that in that bill, but it's not been made into law, and I don't think that this government will make it law. But that's the trajectory of these issues, and I just there's something we have touched on it a little bit, but not so much. And on the one hand, you have the left-wing sort of victim Olympics, identity politics, woke politics, and if you take the question of or the issue of Israel and antisemitism, you have like some forms of it there, and then you have these protesters. I saw I think it was Freddie Sayers from Unheard. He went out and talked to protesters, and one of them was protesting the genocide, and he asked like, oh do you mean the 7th of October? Is that the genocide you're talking about? And the guy got very upset. And he was obviously had a very bleeding heart. And so he said, I condemn Hamas. Is that what you want to do? Awful people. I condemn Hamas and the terrorists. But that doesn't make what Israel is doing any more right. And that's like one strand. But then you have the Islamists, the actual Islamists, and they are and they don't put it like that. They put it like, we're doing resistance towards Israel and we condemn what Israel is doing, and we don't condemn, like we have the left-wing party are in like the left-wing are in alliance with these people, but they overlap, but it's not exactly the same. So you have like the left-wing party, the old communist party in Sweden, they had like a demonstration in Gothenburg, and like one of the people who got up and held a speech, this is just the other day, she was like crying over Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, being killed by Israel, like this hero of mine. And there's like of course it's in the left-wing demonstration, but I don't think that most left-wingers agree with like, oh, he's a great guy, and I love Hamas, I love Hezbollah, and so what's how much of a threat is the Islamism in Britain and like in this issue, and how much of it is left wing and how much is Islamism?
Yeah, I think there's a real problem of the Islamo left, which is a term that originates in France, but it's applicable to a lot of Europe. And I have a chapter in my book looking at the development of the Islamo left over the past 20 or 30 years. And it's really interesting. It goes right back to the early 90s or the mid 90s. A well-known leftist here in the UK published a pamphlet called The Prophet and the Proletariat. And as the title suggests, it was an examination of, to what extent can the left align with radical Islamists? And if you read that pamphlet today, it's really interesting. On the one hand, it's completely bizarre that the left, which is a movement that was, for all its faults, it did spring from the kind of era of Enlightenment, although it went off the rails in numerous different ways that we don't have to go over here. It's bizarre that a movement like that would even think about aligning with regressive, hysterical, religious fanatics who love killing Jews and love killing Westerners and hate women and hate gay people and so on. but they were thinking about it. But what's interesting about that pamphlet, The Prophet and the Proletariat, is that it at least had a sense of caution to it. If you read it now, it's very cautious. It says, look, a lot of these Islamists are fascists. They're really misogynistic. They're really homophobic. They're really racist. So we've got to be careful. But if there's a time in which they're attacking America, we might align with them. Or if there's a time when they're attacking Israel, we might align with them. So it kind of played both sides. But that caution in recent years has completely gone on sections of the left. There are now sections of the left who do go on the streets and say, we're all Hezbollah now. And they do go on the streets and say, Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around, which of course is a reference to the Houthis who've been attacking ships in the Red Sea. The Houthis flag, its literal flag, says, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews. So on the streets of London, the streets of New York, there have been people openly praising an anti-Semitic terrorist army. Yeah, that's how messed up this has become. But I think, so the Islamo left is a problem, but you're right.
And they are, like, the Houthis are, of course, most listeners know this, but they are also part of the proxy war. Like, they are allies of Iran, funded by Iran.
Absolutely.
And so they are the anti-colonial, anti-imperial force in Yemen, according to this analysis.
Exactly, according to this analysis. And, there are even some leftists in Britain who use the phrase axis of resistance to describe Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis, which is a phrase Iran uses. That's what Iran says. And there are some stupid leftists over here who adopt that phrase very unthinkingly. But you're right that there are other sections of the left that don't buy into this. They used to be more prominent, I would say, 10 or 20 years ago. There were sections of the left who said, what's going on? Why are we saying we're all Hezbollah now? Why are we sympathizing with Hamas? There was a lot of them a few years ago. They've gone a bit more quiet, I think, or maybe they've just been pushed aside, or maybe they've all become fascists like me and you. Yeah. Who knows? But it's but you're right that's one particular problem. But then Islamism is a very profound problem, and it's one that our societies, it seems to me, are either unwilling or incapable of dealing with. And you mentioned that there was a terrorist attack on Swedes, which has now largely been forgotten. That happens all the time. There is such a palpable culture of amnesia around terrorist attacks. I was thinking, your listeners will be familiar with Morrissey, the great English singer, formerly of the Smiths. I went to see him in concert last year, and he introduced his new song, which is called Bonfire of the Teenagers, which is a song about the Manchester Arena bombing, in which 22 people were killed, mostly teenagers. And he said to the audience in this huge London venue, he said to the audience, how many of you here can name the suicide bomber who blew up the Manchester Arena? And everyone was kind of looking at their feet and didn't know what to do, and no one could answer. And then he said, how many of you can name the Moors murderers from the 1960s? Of course, everyone can name them, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, who killed 6 children in Manchester in the 1960s. They're known around the world. But no one can name the Manchester Arena bombing, who killed 22 children and young people just 7 years ago. His name was Salman Abedi, by the way. He's one of the worst mass murderers in British history, and no one in this country knows his name. It is so extraordinary to me, the extent to which we are encouraged to forget the violence of radical Islam, which in Britain has killed around 100 people over the past 20 years. That's a lot of people. Far more than the far right. We're told to obsess over the far right. I think the far right in Britain has killed around 3 people, maybe 4, over the same time period. We're encouraged to obsess over the far right, and we're actively encouraged to forget about radical Islam. That really is symptomatic, I think, of the moral cowardice in our societies and our unwillingness to say, listen, maybe the woke ideology and moral relativism has caused more problems than it solved. Maybe we need to get to grips with this. But they don't want to do that, and therefore they just say, as we said after the Manchester Arena bombing, don't look back in anger. That was the slogan. Don't look back. Never get angry. Never think. Never take action. Just sit back and let it all happen. That's essentially what they're saying.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Welcome back to Two Judgy Girls. I'm Mary from the Bay.
And I'm Courtney from LA. TJG is the podcast where we spill all the tea on your favorite reality TV shows, celebrity gossip, and everything in between. We're here to bring you our unfiltered opinions, hilarious commentary, and plenty of laughs along the way.
We're two SDSU Delta Gamma sisters with a microphone and a whole lot of opinions. Each week, we dive headfirst into the wild world of reality television, from Bravo to all the trash TV you could want. We break down the drama, dissect the latest scandals, and share our thoughts on everything from the jaw-dropping moments to the embarrassing antics.
But that's not all. We're not here to just gossip. We're here to connect with you, the jurors, and share our love of all things pop culture. Whether we're dishing on the latest celebrity breakups, discussing our favorite guilty pleasure movies, or sharing embarrassing stories from our own lives, we promise to keep it real, keep it fun, and keep you coming back for more.
Come judge with us.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
I remember you wrote how provocative, like how angry that made you, and I felt the same, and I felt the same since. I think anger is an appropriate response to when you're being targeted, and when an ideology tries to come in and reshape your society. I'm talking about Islamism, and together in like Islamo left ideology, if you combine them, like there's a forces trying to reshape how you view yourself, your culture, the state, and the people who are angry about it, sometimes they phrase it in an improper way, I would say, like the woman you spoke of. Yeah. I don't think you should talk like that, and I don't think you should attack mosques, and I think it was great that people wanted to rebuild the mosque. But you can also understand the anger when you're being targeted over and over again. Yeah. And don't look back in anger it's like telling, it's something similar to telling Jewish people that they should be better victims. Like you're being targeted, and like turn the other cheek, and then the other cheek, and then the other cheek again. Like, no, you should not. You should defend yourself. It goes for Israel, and it goes for Britain, and it goes for Sweden.
I completely agree. I think attacking mosques is completely unacceptable. In fact, it's barbaric to attack people's places of worship. I don't care how a person feels about immigration levels or radical Islamists, maybe even radical Islamists in their own communities. That is no justification for attacking a place of worship in which most people are just normal people praying to their God and getting on with their lives. But you know what was so extraordinary in the UK after those riots, where I think 2 mosques were attacked, one in Southport and one somewhere else. They had bottles thrown at them and rocks thrown at them. It was really awful. What was extraordinary is that the entire left and the entire mainstream media presented this as one of the worst acts of racism of modern times, and they talked about it endlessly. They still talk about it now, the attacks on these mosques. These same people said nothing when synagogues were attacked almost every week since 7th of October. So synagogues in Britain have been graffitied with the K word and the Y word, these incredibly derogatory terms for Jewish people. Synagogues have been had.
This is one of those instances when, as a non-native English speaker, I actually don't know the words. You don't have to repeat them, but it's like sometimes you have to look up, like, what's the K word? And you feel like sort of a worse racist, that you have to like become like a racist academic. Like, I have to become a better racist. Like, I have to learn the slurs.
Yeah, well, your listeners can go and Google the K word and the Y word, and they'll find them. They're out there, and they're everywhere, I guess. But synagogues were attacked. They were graffitied. A synagogue in London, not far from where I live, was surrounded by pro-Palestinian protesters, and the people inside had to be helped out by the police. A man was arrested and charged quite recently with planning a massacre at a synagogue. It goes on and on and on. And they said nothing. So there was a low-level, everyday war on synagogues and Jewish schools and Jewish museums in Britain, and these people said nothing. But the minute a mosque was attacked, they went mad. And of course, that feeds into people's feeling of resentment. Because what it does, it gives people a sense that one religion in particular has a special force field around it. There's one religion, it's not Christianity, it's certainly not Judaism, and it's not Hinduism, it's not any of those. There's one religion called Islam, which for some reason a very special force field has put around it, which means you're not allowed to criticize it, you're not allowed to make fun of it, no comedian will make jokes about it, and you have to basically respect it. And to my mind, if people feel this kind of bristling desire to blaspheme against Islam, that increasingly makes sense to me, because Islam is increasingly the means through which the new elites try to control and re-educate ordinary people. It's not Christianity, because these are all godless heathens. We're ruled by a godless new establishment. They don't believe in anything. But they have weaponized Islam and the idea that criticizing Islam is racist. They've weaponized that as a means through which to tame and control the emotions and the actions of ordinary people. So if some ordinary people start to think, well, fuck this religion, I don't like this, that actually makes sense. So one of the things that we've heard on chants in Britain, when right-wing working class people have protested, not in the riots, I mean in normal protests where they're protesting against immigration or whatever, one chant that they say is, Allah, Allah, who the fuck is Allah? And they say it as a football chant, so it has the kind of rhythm of a football chant. And of course, this always causes outrage. The Guardian can't believe these savages exist, and the establishment can't believe what they're saying. But there's a logic to this. If you are constantly told that there's one religion you're not allowed to criticize, there's one group of people whose practices you're not allowed to ask questions about, there's one community whose ideas you're not allowed to interrogate, it will create this feeling where people will want to say, well, who the fuck is Allah? And that's bad for Muslims as well, because it increases a sense of resentment against them from other sections of society who are saying, well, why is your belief system singled out for special protection? Equality means, I think, Muslims in our societies, if they are here as legal migrants or the descendants of migrants and they're now citizens of our countries, I'm an old-fashioned person who believes they should have equal rights. And part of equality is not only that you have the same rights as everyone else, but that you are subjected to the same everyday discussion and criticism as everyone else. And I say that as the son of immigrants myself. I know full well that my parents' belief system, which is Roman Catholicism, is subjected to criticism in this country all the time. There's a lot of the English middle classes hate Roman Catholicism. They think it's a load of backward rubbish. And we hear those criticisms all the time. That's fine. Part of living in a free society is that you will hear critical ideas about your own way of life. And if we say to Muslims that they shouldn't have to hear that, then we will increase resentment against them and we will lower their own status. So they become children, essentially, who require the protection of the state rather than being treated as equal citizens. So it's bad for everyone.
Thank you, Brendan O'Neill, for being part of Rak Höger.
Thank you very much.
Och stort tack till er som lyssnar. Och vi får inget pressstöd, vi tar inte emot pengar från någon intresseorganisation eller lobbygrupp. Det är endast tack vare er prenumeranter vi kan fortsätta vara självständiga röster i en konform samtid. Och blir ni betalande prenumeranter idag får ni 30% rabatt. Gå då in på www.enrakhoger.se/podd för att ta del av erbjudandet. Vi hörs om en vecka igen.